The phone rang just as Rachel was reaching for her thermos. She paused, brow furrowing at the name on the screen, Gloria Evans, her neighbor from Lancaster, and more importantly, her mother-in-law's neighbor. Gloria never called without a reason. She answered, still balancing her coffee on the kitchen counter. "Gloria, is everything all right?" But the voice that responded wasn't Gloria's. It was someone else, older, breathless. "Mrs. Whitmore? I'm Shirley. I live next door to Gloria and Helen. I'm afraid there's been an emergency." Rachel's spine straightened. Her pulse quickened. "It's your mother-in-law. Helen collapsed this morning. The paramedics came. They think it was a stroke. She's at St. Luke's now, in critical condition." Rachel didn't speak. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. In the background, Caleb was walking into the room, humming, oblivious. "Thank you," Rachel finally managed, her voice shaky. "Thank you for letting me know." She ended the call and turned to her husband. "Caleb," she said, "your mother's in the hospital. It's serious." He blinked. "What? How?" "I just talked to her 2 days ago." Rachel grabbed her purse. "I'm going. I'll take the next train to Lancaster." But Caleb held up a hand. "Wait, I have meetings all day. I've got the French delegation coming in at noon. There's no way I can cancel." Rachel stared at him. "This is your mother. She had a stroke, Caleb." "I know," he said, rubbing his temples. "But it's bad timing. You have that presentation too, remember? The one for the regional campaign." She hesitated. That presentation was months in the making. Her shot at promotion depended on it. But then she thought of Helen, lying in a hospital bed, maybe unable to speak or move, and something inside her settled. "I'll call my boss," Rachel said. "Natasha can do the presentation. She knows the project inside out. I'll handle Lancaster." Caleb looked relieved. Too relieved. "You sure? I mean, it's a big deal for you." "I'm sure," she replied. "Your mother comes first." He stepped forward and kissed her cheek. "Thank you. I'll come join you in a few days. Just need to get past these negotiations." Rachel nodded, but something about the way he said it, so casually, so rehearsed, didn't sit right. She brushed it off. There were more urgent things to worry about. By noon, Rachel was on the train, watching the cityscape blur into fields and highways. Her phone buzzed with work notifications she ignored. Her thoughts spiraled between Helen, the hospital, and Caleb's reaction, or lack of one. She remembered their morning conversation, how he'd smiled while tying his tie, talking about the Alps trip they might take if his contract went through. He hadn't asked about her meeting. Not once. Hadn't noticed her nerves, the trembling of her fingers as she poured his coffee. Now, as the train swayed gently beneath her, Rachel realized something unsettling. Caleb hadn't even offered to drive her to the station. When she arrived in Lancaster, the sky was low and gray. Rain clung to the windows of the waiting cab. The driver didn't speak as they wove through quiet streets lined with old trees and weathered porches. Outside Helen's modest apartment building, Gloria stood waiting under a large plaid umbrella. She looked older than Rachel remembered, thinner too. "Rachel," Gloria greeted, pulling her in for a quick hug. "She's at St. Luke's. It's not good, honey, but she's holding on." "Thank you for calling," Rachel said. "I'll take it from here." But Gloria held her arm gently. She needs more than just presence now. She's going to need real care. Around the clock. They're saying 6 months minimum for any kind of recovery. Rachel stiffened. 6 months? "Yes, dear. That's with daily rehab, therapy, maybe speech recovery if we're lucky. She's stable, but it's serious." 6 months. That wasn't what Caleb told her. He said too, "Max, just until the investor meetings wrapped up." Rachel swallowed hard. "I need to see her." They drove in silence to the hospital. The sterile corridors, the hum of machines, the nurses' soft shoes across linoleum floors. It all hit Rachel like a wave of cold air. Helen Whitmore lay motionless by the window, her face pale, her left side slack. Tubes ran from her arms. A heart monitor beeped slowly. The strong-willed woman who had once ruled Sunday dinners and family holidays now looked impossibly small. Rachel sat beside her and took her hand. It felt like holding a thin glove of skin and bone. Helen stirred, eyes fluttering open for just a moment. "Rachel," she whispered, her voice dry and cracked. "I'm here," Rachel said, squeezing her hand gently. "Caleb had a meeting, but I'm here now." Helen blinked slowly. "You came." "Of course," Rachel whispered, but her voice wavered. She looked down, biting back tears. Outside the window, the clouds thickened. A storm was coming, and Rachel, for the first time, felt like she was standing right in its eye. The next morning, Rachel stood in Helen's kitchen, stirring oatmeal on the stove. The apartment felt untouched since Helen had collapsed. Her knitting bag still sat by the armchair, a half-finished scarf curling like a question mark. The smell of lavender and old books lingered in the air, familiar and oddly comforting. But Rachel didn't feel comforted. She felt suspended, like the breath before a scream. She carried a tray to the small hospital room later that morning. Helen was awake, but speech came only in fragments. Her left arm barely moved. Still, she managed a weak smile when Rachel entered. "I brought oatmeal," Rachel said softly, settling beside her. "Not your usual, but it's warm. Gloria says the hospital food is worse than cafeteria stew." Helen's eyes sparkled faintly. She tried to laugh, but it came out like a breath caught on gravel. Rachel helped her eat, spoon by spoon, wiping her mouth gently between bites. Afterward, they sat in silence, the rhythm of the heart monitor the only sound between them. Later, Rachel stepped out into the corridor, just as Dr. Langley was coming out of another room. He looked exhausted, blue smudges under his eyes, lab coat wrinkled, but his voice was steady. "She's stable," he said, "but progress will be slow. We'll need to begin physical therapy in a week or so. Daily sessions, speech therapy as well. She'll also require assistance with hygiene, mobility, and medication." "For how long?" Rachel asked, though she already feared the answer. 6 months, if not more. That's assuming everything goes well. And even then, we can't guarantee full recovery. Rachel felt the words settle over her shoulders, like wet concrete. Not 2 months. Not a short pause. This was a full stop. That night, Rachel called Caleb from the guest room at Gloria's house, where she was staying temporarily. His voice came through the line crisp and cheerful. "Hey, babe," he said, "how's Mom?" Rachel kept her voice measured. "Stable, but she needs long-term care. Physical therapy, speech rehab, constant supervision." There was a beat of silence. Then, "Oh, that's serious, huh?" "You said 2 months, Caleb. The doctor says at least 6. "Things change, Rachel," he said quickly. "No one can predict this stuff. Look, I want to be there, I do. But I'm in the middle of this French deal, and if I pull out now, I might blow everything." Rachel closed her eyes. "You always have something. A contract, a trip, a reason to be absent." "That's not fair," he snapped, then softened. "I'm doing this for us. For our future." She didn't reply. "Tell you what," Caleb continued. "I'll fly down next weekend. Stay a few days. You just hold down the fort for now, okay?" "Okay," Rachel said, even though her gut whispered otherwise. The days began to blur. Every morning, Rachel visited Helen. She sat through therapy sessions, helped with meals, managed medications. Afternoons were filled with errands, pharmacy runs, insurance paperwork, navigating the unfamiliar rhythms of Lancaster. At night, she collapsed onto Gloria's worn guest bed, too tired to think. Caleb called in the evenings, always with an update about how close he was to wrapping up. But the weekends came and went without him. "You know," Gloria said one morning as they folded laundry together in the sunroom, I remember Caleb as a sweet boy, but he hasn't come around much in recent years. Rachel folded a towel carefully. He's busy. His work is intense. Gloria raised an eyebrow. We all work, dear. But when my mama was sick, I drove 3 hours every weekend to see her. Baked casseroles. Sat through every check-in. That's what you do for family. Rachel wanted to argue, but couldn't. The truth was forming like a bruise under her ribs, visible now, painful to touch. That night, scrolling through her phone to numb the exhaustion, Rachel paused on a photo. It was a post from Marina, one of Caleb's old classmates. A group selfie in a trendy Philadelphia restaurant. Laughter, champagne, and in the far back corner of the image, seated by the window, was Caleb, with a blonde. They weren't touching, but they were leaning close, heads bent, laughing at something only they could hear. Her hand brushed his arm. His lips were near her ear. Rachel's thumb hovered over the screen. She zoomed in. No mistake. It was Caleb, and it wasn't business. Her chest tightened. Her first instinct was to call him, scream at him through the speaker. But she didn't. Instead, she saved the photo, closed the app, sat in the dark. She didn't cry. Not yet. Something colder had settled in. The next morning, Rachel stood at the window, coffee untouched in her hand. Gloria walked in holding a bundle of fresh herbs. Didn't sleep? Gloria asked. No, Gloria tilted her head. You saw something, didn't you? Rachel nodded slowly. He's lying to me. Gloria placed the herbs on a table, walked over, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Then maybe, she said softly, it's time you stop lying to yourself. Rachel stood in the hospital hallway, phone pressed to her ear, listening to Caleb's voice buzz through the line with calculated warmth. I know, Rach, I know it's been a while, he said, breathless as if rushing between meetings. But this week got out of control, legal paperwork, supplier issues, and the translator bailed. The French are threatening to pull out. It's a mess. You promised you'd come last weekend, Rachel said calmly. I meant to. I really did. But things snowballed. Listen, I'll wrap this up Friday and take the first flight Saturday. You'll see me soon. Rachel didn't respond. She stared at the row of vending machines across the hall, their blinking lights reflecting faintly on the cold tile floor. I know it's hard, Caleb continued, but you're amazing, babe. You've always been the strong one. Mom's lucky to have you. She ended the call with a clipped okay and slipped the phone into her coat pocket. He didn't notice she hadn't said goodbye. The weeks passed with mechanical rhythm. Rachel rose early, dressed in borrowed clothes Gloria had offered, and walked the half-mile to St. Luke's through the crisp air of early fall. The trees lining the streets of Lancaster had begun to change, fiery red and amber leaves swirling in quiet flurries. Inside the hospital, the days were endless. She learned how to change for dressings. She adjusted pillows to prevent bed sores. She coaxed mashed potatoes past Helen's lips. She waited silently through Helen's long attempts at speech, her garbled consonants and slurred vowels like puzzles Rachel refused to give up on. By the time Helen was discharged, Rachel had memorized the routine. Every pill, every dietary restriction, every stretching exercise. They moved into Helen's apartment, where Rachel converted the living room into a care space. She bought a medical bed, installed safety rails, rearranged the furniture. Her own life in Philadelphia began to feel like a past life, distant, muted. Each night, Caleb called. Each night, he didn't come. Gloria helped when she could, dropping off soups and lemon tea, running errands when Rachel was too exhausted to drive. They sat together some evenings folding laundry or watching the local news in silence. One Friday, Gloria arrived with a warm pie and something in her eyes, something knowing. He's not coming, she said simply, as she sliced a piece for Rachel. Rachel wanted to protest, to defend Caleb like she always did. But instead, she lowered her fork and said nothing. Sweetheart, Gloria said gently, I've lived long enough to recognize a man who doesn't want to show up. He's not torn. He's not struggling. He's just somewhere else." Rachel exhaled slowly. The warmth of the kitchen, the cinnamon smell, the gentle clink of utensils. It all felt like an illusion wrapped around a truth she no longer had the strength to ignore. "You think he's with someone?" she asked quietly. Gloria didn't answer right away. She simply met Rachel's eyes and said, "I think you already know." That night, after Helen had fallen asleep, Rachel lay on the couch scrolling through her phone. She didn't mean to spy, but something inside her, raw and restless, needed confirmation. She opened Caleb's Instagram. Nothing new. No clues. Then she checked Marina's page again. A new post, this time clearer. Caleb sat at a table in a rooftop bar, city lights behind him. The same blonde woman sat beside him, closer this time. Her hand rested lightly on his thigh. His face was turned toward her, a soft smile Rachel hadn't seen in months, lighting his eyes. The caption read, "When work dinners turn into something sweeter," a champagne emoji. A heart. Rachel's hand trembled. She saved the photo, locked the phone, and stared at the ceiling. She felt nothing. No tears. No rage. Only a hollow understanding that something was over. The next day, she went about her routine in silence, helped Helen with exercises, cooked oatmeal, folded towels, but every motion felt rehearsed, as if someone else had taken over her body. That evening, as Rachel tucked Helen into bed and dimmed the lights, her mother-in-law whispered, "He's not coming, is he?" Rachel froze. It was the first time Helen had spoken of Caleb in weeks. "No," Rachel said softly. "Not yet." Helen's eyes fluttered closed. "He never did stay," she murmured. Rachel stood by the bed long after Helen had fallen asleep. Her thoughts churned quietly, heavy and sharp. She couldn't confront Caleb over the phone. Not like this. Not without seeing the look on his face when he lied. Not without looking into his eyes and asking the question he could no longer dodge. She needed to go back. Just for a day or two. Just to confirm what her heart already knew. Just to stop pretending. The early morning train pulled into Philadelphia under a blanket of steel-gray clouds. Rachel stepped onto the platform with a small overnight bag and a quiet storm behind her eyes. She had told Caleb she was coming to pick up supplies for Helen. That part wasn't a lie, but the truth was heavier than aspirin and compression socks. She didn't know what she expected to find. Maybe she hoped she was wrong, that the blonde woman was a business contact, that the intimacy had been imagined, that Caleb would greet her with surprise and relief. But deep down, Rachel knew. The city felt different, harsher, colder. Her apartment building stood tall and familiar, yet distant, like a house she had only dreamed of once. She paused before unlocking the door. A part of her hesitated, not because she feared confrontation, but because she feared confirmation. Then she rang the doorbell instead. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Caleb stood there, barefoot, wearing a faded t-shirt and sweatpants. His hair was rumpled, his face pale, but not sickly pale. Startled. "Rachel," he said, blinking. "You're early." "I caught the first train," she replied. "You said you were sick." "I brought cold medicine." She stepped inside, brushing past him before he could reply. The apartment looked unfamiliar. The layout was the same, but the energy was off. On the coffee table stood a vase of fresh flowers, lilies her least favorite. Bright pillows with geometric prints lined the couch, ones she had never seen before. A faint scent of perfume lingered in the air, floral and expensive. Not hers. "I tidied up," Caleb said from behind her, his voice too casual. "Didn't expect you till the afternoon." Rachel wandered toward the kitchen. On the dish rack, 2 coffee mugs. One had a smear of pink lipstick on the rim. She didn't flinch. "Looks like you had company," she said quietly, nodding at the mug. Caleb paused. "Just a coworker. She stopped by last night to drop off some files." female co-worker. Rachel asked. Yeah, Jenna, from marketing. We're working on the French campaign together. His words were smooth. Too smooth. Rachel stared the mug again, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the cold medicine. You said you were sick, she said, placing the box on the counter. But the apartment smells like roses and wine, and you're not even sniffling. I took something earlier, he replied quickly. Rachel walked into the bedroom. Her side of the bed looked different. The sheets had been changed. Her books were missing from the nightstand. On the dresser sat a bottle of perfume, Chanel No. 5. She never wore Chanel. Beside it, a hair clip studded with rhinestones. Feminine. Glittering. Not hers. Rachel opened the closet. Half the clothes weren't hers either. Dresses she'd never bought. Blouses in sizes too small. Lingerie she wouldn't wear even in her most adventurous years. The ground beneath her heart began to crumble. Then she heard it, a voice. Caleb, where's my charger? I think I left. Silence. Rachel turned slowly and stepped into the hallway. There, standing near the entrance in a tight white blouse and distressed jeans, was the woman from the photo. Jenna. She froze. Her eyes widened as she looked from Caleb to Rachel. Oh my God, Jenna breathed. You didn't tell me she was coming. Rachel didn't move. Her gaze locked with Jenna's, calm and terrifying in its stillness. I thought you said she wouldn't be back until this afternoon, Jenna whispered harshly. I didn't know, Caleb stammered. She said she needed things for my mom, that's all. How long? Rachel asked, interrupting him. Caleb blinked. How long has she been staying here? She repeated, quieter this time. Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. Don't lie, Rachel added. You're already out of chances. Jenna stepped forward. 2 months. Rachel's jaw tightened. I didn't know she'd just show up, Jenna said, almost defensive. And for what it's worth, I'm pregnant. The hallway spun. Rachel gripped the edge of the wall to steady herself. I'm 2 months along, Jenna continued, softer now. And I'm tired of hiding. A thick, suffocating silence fell. Then Caleb spoke. Not to Rachel. To Jenna. We'll talk later. Just go. Please. No, Jenna said sharply. We talk now. I want to know what you're going to do. Rachel stepped back. Her body was cold, her fingers tingling. She'd expected betrayal. She hadn't expected planning. You said you'd leave her, Jenna said, pointing to Rachel. You said once your mom was better, you'd file for divorce. Rachel's throat burned. Caleb inhaled sharply. We need time. Once my mom's stable, we'll send her to assisted care. Rachel and I will divorce, yes, but gently. She's not strong enough right now. Rachel's voice cut through him like ice. She's not strong enough? You mean the woman I've been bathing, feeding, helping walk again? The woman you haven't seen in over a month. Caleb turned, his face pale, jaw clenched. I was protecting her, he said. She doesn't need stress. You weren't protecting her, Rachel said, stepping closer. You were eliminating obstacles. She turned and walked toward the door. Caleb followed. Wait, don't go like this. We need to talk. Rachel spun around. We will talk, Caleb, but not now. Not with your girlfriend in the doorway and her baby in your future. She reached for the handle, and that's when Jenna said it, flat, direct, almost triumphant. She's not just pregnant. He promised we'd start over. Just us. No strings. Rachel opened the door. Good, she said, because as of this moment, I'm no longer one. The sun had barely risen by the time Rachel arrived back at the small apartment in Lancaster. Her fingers were stiff from the cold, but she barely noticed. All through the train ride, her mind played the conversation over and over again. Jenna's voice, Caleb's silence, the smell of someone else's perfume on her sheets. She didn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere between Philadelphia and the edge of her belief. Gloria opened the door before she could knock. "I heard the taxi," she said quietly. "Come in." Rachel stepped inside and dropped her bag on the floor with a soft thud. She looked older than when she'd left just 24 hours earlier. Gloria didn't ask questions. She just handed her a mug of herbal tea and said, "Heart's been through enough. Let it rest." Rachel sat at the kitchen table, the steam rising between her hands. After a moment, she whispered, "There's another woman. She's been living there. For months." Gloria sat across from her, lips pressed into a thin line. "She's pregnant," Rachel added. "And Caleb," he said, "once his mother's better, he'll send her to assisted care. And divorce me. Quietly. He called us obstacles." Gloria didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand gently over Rachel's. It was a simple gesture, but it carried all the weight of solidarity. "I've known men like Caleb," she said finally. "They don't break things with hammers. They do it with whispers, with smiles. And when you look down, you realize you've been standing on cracked glass for years." Rachel looked down at the tea. "He used my care for Helen against me." Gloria nodded. "Because he knew you'd never leave her." That afternoon, Rachel returned to Helen's apartment and resumed the routine as if nothing had happened. She reheated soup, changed linens, administered medications, but there was a stillness in her, a new kind of silence that wrapped around her like armor. Helen noticed it. That evening, as Rachel helped her from the chair to the bed, Helen reached for her hand and said, "He still hasn't come." Rachel didn't respond right away. Then softly, "No, and I don't think he will." Helen sighed. Her hand, frail and trembling, squeezed Rachel's lightly. "I thought I raised him better." Rachel hesitated, then said, "He has someone else, a woman named Jenna. She's expecting his child." The words sat heavy in the room, like the air before a storm. Helen closed her eyes. "I should have seen it, should have known." Rachel shook her head. "You're not to blame." "I am," Helen whispered. "I let him get away with too much. I made excuses, covered for him. I taught him that love didn't have to mean accountability." She opened her eyes again. "You don't have to stay." Rachel blinked. "What?" "You've done more for me in 2 months than he has in years. You don't owe us anything." Rachel felt her throat tighten. "I can't leave you now." Helen smiled sadly. "You already did. You left the woman who forgave everything, the one who kept choosing a man who never chose her back." That night, Rachel stood in the hallway holding her phone. She scrolled through photos of the life she had tried so hard to protect. Wedding pictures, dinners, trips, all of it now felt curated, posed and filtered through a lens of denial. She opened her call log, tapped Caleb's name, but she didn't call. Instead, she walked into the living room, picked up the landline and dialed Gloria. The phone rang once. "Gloria," she said, "you were right. I saw everything, and it's worse than I imagined." Gloria's voice was calm on the other end. "So what are you going to do?" Rachel looked around the room, at the neatly folded blankets, the medications lined up in perfect order, the schedule tacked to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. "I don't know yet," she whispered, "but I'm done pretending." The next morning, Rachel called Caleb. "I'm coming back next week," he said immediately, voice filled with forced cheer. "The project's almost wrapped. I'll spend the weekend." "I was at the apartment," Rachel interrupted. Silence. "I saw her. I saw everything." He exhaled slowly. "Rachel, I didn't mean for it to happen this way." "Yes, you did. You just didn't think I'd find out like this." "Please, let's talk about this," he said quickly. "In person, calmly." "There's nothing left to talk about," she said. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She ended the call, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something shift, like a window cracking open after being sealed too long. She wasn't a wife anymore. Not to him. and soon she wouldn't be at all. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the kind of evening when the world seemed to settle into itself. Helen had just drifted off after her medication, the soft rise and fall of her breath comforting in its rhythm. Rachel sat in the small living room, surrounded by shadows and silence, trying to hold herself together. She hadn't planned to go back. Not again. But something inside her, restless, unresolved, pulled her toward the truth. Not just pieces of it. The whole picture. She needed to hear it for herself. Not from photos. Not from confessions under pressure. She wanted to hear the way they spoke about her when they thought she was far away. She told Gloria the next morning. "I'm going back," she said simply. Gloria didn't ask why. She just nodded and said, "Be careful." Rachel didn't tell Caleb she was coming. She didn't need to. He had already stopped expecting her. She arrived in Philadelphia by noon, picked up the cold medicine again, her old shield of pretense, and rode a cab to the apartment. The hallway was quiet. She rang the bell once. No answer. She used her key. Inside, the apartment was pristine, almost too pristine. There were fresh flowers in the vase, but a different kind this time, roses. Her coat no longer hung on the rack. The bookshelf had been rearranged. The apartment wasn't just cleaned. It had been rewritten. Rachel walked slowly through the space, letting the silence speak. 2 coffee mugs sat in the sink, one with a faint smudge of lipstick. In the bathroom, a toothbrush, pink, stood next to Caleb's. On the counter, a bottle of prenatal vitamins. Her breath caught. She turned toward the bedroom, then paused. Voices, low and hushed, coming from the hallway just outside the apartment. She moved toward the door, her bare feet silent against the floor. Slowly, she opened it just a crack, just enough to hear. "I told you not to come today," Caleb hissed. "I forgot something," Jenna said, her voice sharp. "Besides, how was I supposed to know she'd show up unannounced?" "You said she messaged you," he snapped. "She said she might come next week. I thought I had time to grab my things and leave." Rachel pressed her palm to the wall. Her heart thudded loud in her ears. "I can't keep doing this," Jenna whispered. "Lying, waiting, sneaking around like I'm some dirty secret." "You knew the situation," Caleb replied. "We agreed, after Mom gets stable, after we move her into the care facility, then I'd end things cleanly." "You've been saying that for months." "Because it's complicated," he barked, then lowered his voice again. "She's still clinging to the marriage, still playing nurse to my mother. I need time." Jenna laughed bitterly. "You said you were done with her, that she was weak, obsessed with holding on to a family that doesn't exist anymore." Rachel's breath caught. "Not now," Caleb hissed. "She's inside. Go. I'll call you later." "I'm pregnant, Caleb," Jenna said suddenly. "I'm not going to keep hiding in stairwells and pretending we're just colleagues." Rachel froze. She had already known. But hearing it again, in that tone, in that context, it hit differently. There was a pause. "Are you sure?" Caleb asked quietly. "Absolutely." Silence. Then Caleb's voice, steady and calculating. "Then we have no choice. Once my mom's condition stabilizes, we move her into a care home. I already looked into some places, private, discreet, out of the city." "And Rachel?" Jenna asked. "I'll file for divorce. Tell her gently. Make it about incompatibility. She's too emotional anyway. Always has been." Something in Rachel cracked. Her hand trembled on the doorknob. Then Jenna said, "You really think she won't fight back?" Caleb let out a small laugh. "Rachel? She's been trained her whole life to sacrifice. First her job, then her time, then her self-respect. She won't fight. She'll cry, maybe slam a few doors, then she'll leave." Rachel let go of the knob. She turned away from the door, not with anger, not even with pain, but with clarity. Everything she needed to hear had been handed to her in whispers. In hallway conversations, they thought she was too far away to catch. They had stripped her down to an afterthought, an inconvenience, a pawn to move off the board. She walked to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and dialed a familiar number. "Gloria," she said, her voice low. "It's worse than I thought." She explained everything. Jenna's pregnancy, the plan to send Helen away, the timeline for the divorce. On the other end, Gloria inhaled sharply. "I knew he was a coward," she said. "But to discard his mother like that, like she's furniture he's tired of." "I need to talk to him," Rachel said. "Not on the phone. Face to face." "Do you want me to come get you?" "Not yet," she replied. "I have one more thing to say. And after that, I'm done." She stood and opened the closet. Half her clothes were missing, replaced with dresses that weren't hers. She found a duffel bag and began packing what little was left of her life there. When Caleb walked back in a few minutes later, alone, he found her calmly folding a sweater. "Rachel," he said, startled. Wait, what are you doing?" She didn't look up. "Packing. Can we talk? Please." She finally met his eyes. "I heard everything." His mouth opened, then closed. "I heard what you said to Jenna. About me. About your mother. About your plans." "Rachel," he said, stepping forward. "You have to understand." "No," she cut in. "I don't. Not anymore." And she kept packing, and he couldn't stop her. Rachel didn't shout. She didn't throw things. She didn't cry in front of him. She folded her clothes into the bag one by one, her movements calm and measured, as if she were preparing for a weekend trip instead of walking out of a marriage. Caleb stood in the doorway of the bedroom, arms slack at his sides. "You're overreacting," he said finally. "You're tired, emotional. Let's just sit down and talk this through." She zipped the bag. The sound was loud in the silence. "You want to talk?" Rachel asked, turning to face him. "Okay, let's talk." Caleb relaxed slightly. "Good. That's all I'm asking." She gestured around the room. "Let's talk about how this place looks nothing like it used to. Let's talk about how you erased me before I even left. Let's talk about how you told your girlfriend I was weak and too emotional." Her voice didn't rise, but every word struck like glass against tile. Caleb tried to reach for her hand. "You have to understand the pressure I'm under." "No," she said firmly, stepping back. "You don't get to hide behind pressure. Not when I've been the one holding everything together. Your mother, her recovery, this apartment, your name." "I never asked you to do all that," he muttered, almost sulking. "No," she agreed. "You didn't. You just let me. Because it was convenient." He didn't reply. "I was never your partner, Caleb," she said. "I was your buffer, your caregiver, your silence." She picked up the bag and slung it over her shoulder. He stepped forward again, this time more urgently. "Where are you going?" "Back to Lancaster. For now." "You're just going to walk out?" She tilted her head. "You were hoping I'd scream, throw things, make a scene, so you could tell everyone I was unstable. But I'm not giving you that story." He swallowed hard. "You don't have anywhere else to go." Her voice was colder now. "You've always assumed I had nowhere else. That's your mistake." He followed her into the hallway, speaking quickly. "You're still my wife. We can work through this. We've been through worse." Rachel paused at the door. "No, Caleb. I've been through worse. You've simply waited for the fallout to settle." She opened the door. "You're not thinking clearly," he said, almost pleading now. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," she replied. Outside, the sky was soft with evening light. She descended the stairs without looking back. The taxi she'd called was already waiting at the curb. When she arrived back in Lancaster, Gloria met her at the station. Rachel stepped out of the cab with her bag and nothing else. No tears, no explanations, just the exhausted calm of someone who had finally set down a burden she never agreed to carry. Gloria didn't ask any questions. She just wrapped Rachel in a long, quiet hug. "You did it," she whispered. "You left." "I had to," Rachel replied. "He thought I wouldn't." They drove in silence, the town slipping by through the windows like an old photograph. The leaves had started falling in earnest now, covering sidewalks and porches like a soft surrender. When they arrived at Helen's apartment, the older woman was asleep in her chair by the window, a blanket draped across her knees. Rachel stood for a long moment watching her chest tight. She didn't wake her. Instead, she walked quietly to the kitchen and made herself tea. She sat at the table and opened her notebook, one she hadn't touched in years. The first page still had scribbles from a long-abandoned idea for a memoir. She turned to a clean sheet and began to write, not for Caleb, not about Caleb, but about Rachel, the woman who had carried other people's weight for too long. The woman who chose silence not because she had no voice, but because she was learning when and how to use it. The woman who left without slamming the door, because she had something far louder waiting to be written. The next morning, Helen woke to find Rachel already up, dressed, and standing by the window. The tea kettle whistled softly in the background, and golden light spilled across the apartment like warmth returning to a body long gone cold. "You're back," Helen said, her voice gravelly from sleep. Rachel turned. "I am." Helen studied her face, the stillness in her eyes, the subtle tension in her shoulders. "You left him." "I did." Helen nodded, like she had known it would happen eventually. "Good." They sat together over breakfast, the silence no longer heavy but respectful. Two women who had both loved and lost in ways no one else fully understood. Then Rachel reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out an envelope. She laid it gently on the table. "What's this?" Helen asked. "A letter," Rachel said. "From your son, or more accurately, for him. But I want you to read it first." Helen hesitated before unfolding the paper. Rachel sat quietly as Helen's eyes scanned the words, her face flickering between disbelief and sorrow. In the letter, Rachel had written everything. What she'd overheard, what Caleb had said, his plans for her, the home he'd researched behind her back, how he had justified discarding her as if she were too fragile to notice being abandoned. At the bottom, a single line in bold ink. "I will not participate in betraying the woman who taught me what grace looks like." Helen folded the letter with trembling hands. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Rachel said quietly, "but you needed to know." Helen looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you for telling me. I would have gone to that facility believing it was my idea, thinking Caleb had my best interests in mind." Rachel's throat tightened. "You deserve the truth, even when it hurts." Helen blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "Do you think maybe I made him this way?" Rachel reached across the table and took her hand. "You didn't make him anything. He made choices, over and over, and now we make ours." That afternoon, Helen asked Rachel to take her for a walk. It was the first time in weeks she had requested to leave the apartment. Rachel helped her bundle up, button her coat, and supported her as they made their way down the front steps and into the soft light of October. The neighborhood was quiet, dotted with falling leaves and wind chimes that sang in brief, hopeful bursts. They walked slowly, every step deliberate. At the corner, Helen paused. "There's a lawyer's office 2 blocks from here, isn't there?" Rachel glanced at her. "Yes." Helen's lips thinned. "I think it's time I updated my will." Rachel didn't press. She simply nodded. "I don't want Caleb to have anything he didn't earn," Helen said after a moment. "And he's earned exactly nothing." "You're sure?" Rachel asked softly. "I'm sure," Helen replied. "And when I'm gone, I want the person who stayed, not the one who disappeared, to be the one holding the key." They turned back, toward home. Helen walked straighter now, as if reclaiming not just her balance, but her authority. That evening, after Helen had gone to bed, Rachel sat alone at the kitchen table. She pulled out her notebook again. On a fresh page, she began listing names of the care agencies Helen might need in the future. She wrote down the names of lawyers Gloria had recommended. She started sketching a schedule, not for obligation but for liberation. A life with structure, not chains. Then she opened her laptop and clicked on a folder she hadn't touched in 2 years. Design concepts. There, like relics from a different lifetime, were illustrations, brand logos, color palettes. The beginnings of a business she had once dreamed of starting. A sustainable home goods brand. Back when she still believed she was allowed to want things for herself. Rachel stared at the screen for a long time. Then, like waking up from a long sleep, she began to work. She adjusted the font of a logo. She wrote a mission statement. She saved the file under a new name, Sparrow and Ash. She smiled faintly. The name meant something. Resilience and fire, flight and rebirth. Because Rachel wasn't just the woman who had been left behind. She was the woman who walked away and then chose to build something entirely her own. It had been 4 days since Rachel returned to Lancaster, and in that time, she had transformed Helen's small apartment into something of a quiet command center. A new lawyer had been contacted, medical paperwork updated, a comprehensive care plan drawn up. Rachel had never felt more in control because, for the first time in years, she was designing her life on purpose, not just reacting to someone else's emergencies. Then Caleb called. It was a Tuesday morning, gray skies outside, the kind that made the world feel slower. Rachel almost didn't answer, but something in her needed to hear his voice, not for closure, but to confirm the clarity she'd found wasn't just anger, it was truth. She picked up. "Rachel," Caleb said immediately, his voice soft, almost rehearsed. "I've been trying to give you space." Rachel didn't reply. "I got your letter," he continued. "Or I guess Mom did. She sent me a photo of it. You didn't hold back." "No," Rachel said quietly. "I didn't." "I get it," he said. "You're hurt. You feel betrayed. But don't you think airing everything like that to my mother was cruel?" Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Cruel?" "Yes," he said, a little firmer now. "She's recovering. You don't know what stress like that could do to her heart." Rachel's voice stayed calm. The real stress was being manipulated into a care home by her own son. She deserves better than lies wrapped in concern. Caleb sighed. "Rachel, this can't be how we end." "It already is. But you've always been the reasonable one. You don't just quit." "I didn't quit," she said. "I chose myself. For once." Silence. Then he asked, "What happens now?" Rachel looked out the window at the trees lining the sidewalk. "You're free to live your life, Caleb. With Jenna. With your new apartment, your new plans. Just know you don't get to rewrite the story to make yourself the victim." "She's pregnant," Caleb said, a bit too forcefully. "I have to build a future for my child." "I hope you do," Rachel replied. "And I hope you're better to that child than you were to your mother. Or to me." Later that day, Caleb showed up. Rachel was in the kitchen with Gloria, reviewing medication schedules when the doorbell rang. She didn't expect him to come to Lancaster. But there he was, standing on Helen's porch like someone who'd lost his map and just realized it. He looked smaller than she remembered. Helen was resting. Gloria went to open the door, but Rachel raised her hand. "Let me." When she opened it, Caleb tried to smile. "You look good." Rachel didn't return the smile. "What do you want?" "I came to talk." "Say it here." He glanced past her into the apartment. "I thought we could speak privately." "Those days are over," Rachel said. "Say what you came to say." Caleb hesitated, then spoke. "Mom's made some changes. To her will. To her care directive. She wanted to make sure you weren't pressuring her." Rachel laughed under her breath. "You're worried about me pressuring her?" "I'm just saying," he backpedaled. "It's a lot of sudden decisions. She's vulnerable. She's finally seen what you've become." He flinched. Rachel stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. Listen to me carefully. Helen is lucid. She's capable, and she's choosing what's best for her without your permission. I'm still her son, and I was her caregiver, the one who bathed her, fed her, cleaned her floors, held her hand during physical therapy. Where were you? At lunch meetings? Booking spa weekends with your girlfriend? He had no response. Rachel crossed her arms. You don't get to show up now and question my integrity. You lost that right the moment you treated your mother like an obligation and your wife like a ghost. He looked away. Then, quietly, I didn't think you had it in you. To walk away. I know, she said. That's why it worked so long. Caleb's jaw clenched. So this is it. This is me saying no. She stepped back inside and closed the door. Not with a slam. Just a click. Firm. Final. Inside, Gloria waited with a quiet smile. You handled that well. I meant every word. They returned to their notes, but the atmosphere had changed. A line had been drawn, and for the first time, Rachel wasn't afraid of standing on the other side of it. The next morning, Rachel received a call from a local private care facility, one of the places Caleb had quietly submitted applications to behind her back. Hi, this is Diane from Willow Ridge. I'm calling to confirm a consultation for a Ms. Helen Grant, scheduled by her son Caleb Grant. Rachel nearly dropped her mug. I'm sorry, she said slowly, but that consultation has been canceled. Permanently. There was a pause on the other end. Oh, okay. Just so you know, he submitted the medical intake forms and an authorization under your name. Rachel felt the heat rise behind her eyes. I'll be sending you a notarized statement of revocation and a copy of the power of attorney. I'm Ms. Grant's primary caregiver and legal medical proxy. Understood. We'll remove the request. Rachel hung up, her hand trembling. She walked to Helen's room, knocked gently and stepped inside. Helen was awake, her eyes focused and alert. What happened? Rachel sat beside her and said softly, Caleb tried to book you into Willow Ridge under my name, without telling either of us. Helen blinked, then shook her head in disbelief. He just won't stop. No, Rachel replied, but now I will. They contacted their attorney immediately. Gloria came over with the documents, Helen's revised will, medical directives, and a cease and desist letter addressed to Caleb. Every line of it was clear. Helen's care was no longer within his reach, and any attempt to interfere again would be met with legal consequences. That afternoon, they mailed everything. Registered post. Return receipt. By evening, Rachel felt a peace she hadn't known in months. She and Helen sat outside on the small balcony, watching the neighborhood settle into dusk. A breeze stirred the wind chimes. A child rode a bike down the sidewalk below, his laughter echoing into the fading light. You know, Helen said, her voice steady, he wasn't always like this. Caleb. Rachel didn't reply. He was a sweet boy once. Thoughtful. Quiet. He used to cry when I stepped on ants. Rachel glanced at her. What happened to him? Helen exhaled slowly. I did. Maybe not entirely. But I raised him to be charming. To hide the ugly parts. I taught him to win, not to reflect. And his father? Well, John taught him that women are only valuable when they're needed. That love is something you earn by serving. Rachel's chest tightened. I saw you as a second chance, Helen admitted. Someone who could balance him. But instead he bent you. Until you didn't even recognize yourself. I let him, Rachel whispered. No, Helen said gently, you trusted him. That's not the same thing. They sat in silence for a while. Then Helen said, you saved me. Not just my health. You saved my dignity. Rachel looked at her, her throat thick. I didn't do it for thanks. I know, Helen replied. That's why it matters. The next day, something extraordinary happened. A letter arrived, not from Caleb, but from Jenna. Rachel opened the envelope cautiously. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharp and slanted. Rachel, you don't know me. Not really. But I know you. I've seen your picture in Caleb's wallet. I've seen your name on envelopes he never sent. And I've heard him say things that I wish I'd questioned earlier. I'm not writing to apologize for him. That's his burden. I'm writing because I'm leaving. I'm not going to raise a child with a man who treats women like they're disposable. I'm keeping the baby, but I'm doing it on my own. I don't need a reply. I just wanted you to know he's alone now. And it wasn't you who drove everyone away. It was him. Jenna Rachel read it twice, then folded it and placed it in the back of her notebook. She didn't feel vindicated. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt released. This wasn't revenge. It was return. Return to herself. Return to the woman who had once imagined a different life. One where her voice mattered and her boundaries held. Rachel stepped out onto the balcony again. The wind was picking up. Autumn was deepening, but she wasn't afraid of the cold anymore, because now she had warmth she could trust inside. A week passed without another word from Caleb. No emails, no calls, no apologies. Rachel assumed he was licking his wounds somewhere in the sleek apartment he had built on a foundation of lies. She no longer felt the need to look back. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to Helen. The handwriting was unmistakably Caleb's. Rachel debated throwing it away, but it wasn't hers to decide. She brought it to Helen, who sat at the kitchen table folding towels, her hands still nimble despite the tremors. "It's from him," Rachel said simply, holding out the envelope. Helen didn't reach for it right away. "Open it. Read it to me." Rachel hesitated, then unfolded the letter and began. "Dear Mom, I know I've made mistakes. I let things spiral and I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope we can talk. I'd like to come by this weekend. Maybe Sunday dinner. Just the three of us. Like old times." Caleb Rachel looked up. Helen's face was unreadable. "Dinner," she said finally. "After everything." Rachel shrugged. "Your call." Helen nodded slowly. "Let him come." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" Helen's voice was steady. "If he wants to see what old times really meant, let him." On Sunday evening, Rachel set the table with quiet hands, not out of nostalgia, not out of obligation, but because she needed to be ready, not to host Caleb, but to confront him in the full light of who she had become. When the doorbell rang, she opened it calmly. Caleb stood there with a bottle of wine and a carefully ironed shirt, as if he were visiting distant relatives instead of facing two women who had unraveled his entire web. "You look well," he said cautiously. "You look like someone trying too hard," Rachel replied. He smiled awkwardly and stepped inside. Helen sat at the table, already in her chair, hands folded. Caleb hesitated, as if unsure whether to kiss her cheek. He didn't. Dinner began with small talk. Weather, traffic, work. Then Helen set her fork down and said, "Do you remember your 5th grade science fair?" Caleb blinked. I made that volcano with the baking soda." "You didn't," Helen corrected. "I did. You played video games. And when they gave you 2nd place, you told your teacher I was the one who helped you. But you didn't say I did all the work." Caleb looked confused. "Why are we talking about that?" "Because," Helen said, "that's when it started. You learning that charm could hide laziness, that a smile and a few good lines could mask the truth." Rachel sat perfectly still. Helen continued, "And I let you, because I was tired, because I wanted peace. But peace bought with silence is just debt, Caleb. And you've been collecting interest for years." Caleb's face flushed. "I came here to talk, to make amends." "No," Helen said. "You came to reset the board, but there is no board anymore. Rachel's not your pawn. I'm not your cover. We're both out of the game." Caleb looked to Rachel. "You're really okay with this?" "I'm not okay with what happened," Rachel replied. "But I'm not looking for your redemption. I'm building something you'll never be part of." He stood. "So that's it. This whole dinner was just what? A performance." Helen picked up her fork. "No, dear. This was dessert. The main course was your consequences." He opened his mouth to say something, but found nothing. Rachel stood too. "You can see yourself out." Caleb walked to the door, shoulders stiff. Just before he opened it, he turned. "You know, not everyone would have taken your side." Rachel met his eyes. "Then it's a good thing I stopped needing sides. I have a spine now." The door closed behind him with the quiet weight of finality. And this time no one felt empty, because they had said what needed to be said. And that was enough. The house didn't collapse. The sky didn't fall. The grief that Rachel had braced for never arrived. Instead, what came was space. Real, living, breathing space. The Monday after Caleb's awkward exit, Helen began physical therapy again. Not because she was forced, but because she wanted to walk to the library with Rachel by Christmas. That morning, Rachel helped her into her shoes, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and they stepped into the brisk autumn air like two women preparing to reclaim a world they had once thought belonged only to others. Gloria stopped by later with cinnamon rolls and a bottle of wine she insisted was too good to save. They toasted not to revenge, not to endings, but to freedom. Rachel hadn't celebrated anything in years, but now there was a glimmer of something earned. That afternoon, Rachel received an email from a former design colleague in Philadelphia, someone who had seen her updated portfolio online. "I don't know what changed in your work," he wrote, "but it has heart now. Let's talk." She didn't reply right away. Instead, she sat at her desk, looking out the window at the golden trees swaying. No rage, no panic, just a quiet ache where something old had once lived. Then she replied, "I'm ready." That night, Helen knocked gently on Rachel's door. "May I come in?" Rachel nodded and set down her pen. Helen entered with a small box in her hands, wooden, carved, the kind of thing that once lived on a high shelf no one touched. "I've been holding on to this," Helen said, sitting at the edge of the bed. "I always meant to give it to you, before everything." Rachel opened the box, slowly. Inside was a brooch, gold, leaf-shaped, delicate, vintage. And beneath it, a note in faded ink. "To the woman who does not need to shout to be heard." Rachel stared at it, unmoving. "It was my mother's," Helen said. "She wasn't perfect, but she knew how to be brave without being loud." Rachel blinked quickly, chest rising. "I think you've more than earned it." She didn't speak. She simply reached forward and wrapped Helen in the kind of hug that doesn't come with words, only truth. The next morning, a certified envelope arrived for Rachel. It was from Caleb's attorney. She didn't open it right away. She made tea. She took her time. She sat on the balcony and let the sun touch her face before she even thought of what it might say. Then she slit the seal and read it. Caleb had filed for divorce. Uncontested. No demands. No threats. Just a clinical list of what he wanted to walk away with. He hadn't included Helen's condo. He hadn't asked for money. Not even the car. Just silence. Rachel read it twice, then set it down. "Final," she whispered, and meant it. At dinner that night, Helen asked, "Do you regret it?" Rachel looked at her over the rim of her mug. "Leaving." Helen nodded. Rachel thought for a moment. "No, I regret staying so long I forgot how to leave." They ate in comfortable silence, candles flickering between them. Outside, the wind picked up, swirling the dry leaves like whispers of the past spinning themselves into nothing. And somewhere across town, in an apartment too quiet for someone who always needed an audience, Caleb sat alone. No one had yelled. No one had thrown plates. But somehow, this quiet, this calm was louder than any storm he could have imagined. The first snow came early that year, just a thin dusting across the sidewalks and rooftops, like winter had exhaled without fully settling in. Rachel stood by the window, watching it fall. She wrapped her cardigan tighter and held the mug of tea close to her chest, breathing in the scent of chamomile and cardamom. It had been months now, not since the beginning of her freedom, but since the last time she'd felt fear. That morning, she caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror. She paused. It wasn't just the change in hairstyle or the absence of the quiet sadness that used to hang from her shoulders like wet fabric. It was the light. There was light behind her eyes. Not fire, not fury, just presence. Like someone who had returned to herself after years in a house she didn't recognize. She whispered, "There you are." Helen had become stronger, both in body and voice. Physical therapy sessions had turned into short walks outside, then trips to the grocery store, then, just last week, a visit to the town square to watch the Christmas lights being hung. People who had once pitted her now greeted her with warmth and admiration. And beside her always was Rachel, no longer the shadow wife, no longer the woman who waited to be chosen, but someone known and respected. One evening, while organizing boxes in the spare room, Rachel found something she hadn't seen in years, a small, leather-bound notebook she used to sketch in during her design school days. Inside were notes about dream clients, fabric samples taped to the pages, and a business plan titled Harvest and Hearth. She smiled. The name didn't feel right anymore. That woman had been dreaming of safety, of simplicity. But the Rachel of now, she didn't need small. She needed true. She pulled out a new notebook and wrote, in neat cursive at the top of the page, "The Ash and Wing Collective, no more waiting. No more proving. Just building. Not a brand. A life." That weekend, Helen hosted a tea for a few women from her neighborhood. Old friends, some new acquaintances. Rachel wasn't sure how many would actually show up, but by noon the table was full. The room alive with the kind of laughter that heals fractures too deep for words. Helen wore lipstick for the first time in months. She told stories that had Rachel laughing so hard she had to excuse herself. When one woman asked, "So, your son, will he be joining us for the holidays?" Helen replied without hesitation, "No, but my daughter will." She gestured to Rachel with a soft smile. Rachel felt her throat tighten. She had never been introduced that way before. Not by blood, not by law, but by choice. And somehow that meant more. Later, after the last guest had left and Helen had gone to bed, Rachel sat on the sofa, knees tucked under her, notebook in her lap. She sketched a candle label design. Simple, elegant. She thought about the scent. Pine, tobacco leaf, maybe a note of vanilla and firewood. She titled it, "First Winter Free." She stared at the name for a long time. Then she whispered to the quiet room, "This is the life I gave myself." Outside, the snow began again, soft and steady. No storms, no chaos, just the gentle hush of a world that had finally stopped spinning on someone else's axis. And a woman who no longer needed a mirror to know she had survived. Spring came late that year, like a cautious guest unsure of her welcome. But when it did arrive, it bloomed fiercely, dogwoods exploding in soft whites, tulips lining the sidewalks like delicate soldiers, and a warm breeze that smelled like second chances. Rachel was in the kitchen when she found it, a letter unopened, tucked behind an old cookbook Helen had been sorting. The envelope was thin, the paper aged, and the handwriting unmistakably her own. She had written it nearly 2 years ago, during one of those long, aching nights when Caleb's absence felt louder than his presence. A letter she never sent. A letter meant for her future self, back when she wasn't sure she'd have one. She read it standing at the counter. "Rachel, if you're reading this, it means you made it out. Or at least you're thinking about it. Maybe you're scared. Maybe you've already left, and now you're wondering what comes next. I don't know where we'll end up, but I do know this. You are not crazy. You are not weak. You are not the problem. He made you feel small so he could feel big. He called it love, but it was control. He called it care, but it was convenience. He made promises like fences, meant to keep you inside, not keep you safe. Please remember who you were before him. And if you can't remember, that's okay. Just start building her again. From the ground. From the ash. From whatever pieces you still have in your hands. Because she's still in there. And she's worth saving. Love, Rachel. She folded it carefully and slid it into the new notebook she now carried with her everywhere. It didn't hurt to read anymore. It felt holy, like closure written by a ghost who had finally been laid to rest. That night, she sat beside Helen on the back porch. The wind was warm, and fireflies had just begun their slow dance above the grass. "I'm thinking of moving," Rachel said quietly. Helen didn't look surprised. "Where to?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Maybe Asheville. Maybe somewhere smaller. Somewhere I can paint, design, teach. Somewhere that's mine." Helen nodded. "You've earned it." They sipped tea in silence. Then Helen added, "You don't need my permission, you know." "I know," Rachel smiled, "but it means something to have your blessing." Helen took her hand. "Wherever you go, you'll carry everything you've learned. The pain, the strength, the peace. You don't need a house to hold it. It's already in you." 2 weeks later, Rachel packed a small moving truck. Not with regret, not with escape, but with intention. A new address, a new studio space, a new garden. She hugged Gloria tight. She kissed Helen's cheek and promised to call every Sunday. And as she drove away, windows down, music low, the wind tangling her hair, she whispered to the sky, "I am free." No audience, no finale, just one woman, one road, and the life she built after the storm had passed. The past didn't define her. The silence didn't break her. And the woman in the rearview mirror? She was finally exactly where she belonged.